Hi, welcome to our NX review session. Today we will review the commands under the Surface tab, where we will have some commands of swept through curves and then possibly some of the law extension, and then we also will review some of the commands within the curve tab, and then at the conclusion of that we will be creating a solid geometry based on a particular command called thicken. Alright, we'll now start with our first building of a swept surface. So we're going to go to our surface command. So our first selection in our select intent is in infer curve. So let's go ahead and just grab onto, we only have one section here, so it's going to grab onto that particular section. We see that we have a particular vector is pointing in the particular direction. That's what we call the built direction. So we only have one. Let's go ahead and advance to our guide. So in our guide, once again, just have one instead of three. And then with our preview turned on, we can see that quickly NX create a swept surface for us. We want to go ahead and select OK, and then want to quickly hide that by selecting the eyeball right here. So that hidden that because we want to take a look at using the swept surface to create using the three sections that we have for our next selection. Once again, in our swept command, using a select intent, we want to go ahead and select a edge, and then once that is done, we highlight that. We notice that this vector now is in the opposite direction, so pay close attention when that occurred. So let's go ahead and select another one, and want to select mouse button 2 first. So what it does is that complete that selection of our first set of section. And then we want to go and select our second one. Now notice we are at the build direction. If you look at the vector following that line, we are actually crisscrossing now. We will see the end results of that in a minute. Let's go ahead and hit MB2 and then select our third set of a section. So now once that is done, we're going to select our guide. And now we will see that the result of that, as we predicted, it is going to crisscrossing that for us. Now, if that is the case, you don't need to say, well, darn, I need to start over again. You don't. So in this selection of the user interface, there is a drop down where there's section 1, 2, and 3. So we can just select section 1, and then what we want to do is just reverse that. There is a reverse direction. So now once we select that reverse direction, we see that the build direction is consistent in all three sections. So once that is done, make sure all of our other selection options are consistent with what we had before. Alright, once we have completed that, our preview of NX has given us that option to see. One of the quick way we can see how having three different sections is that I'm going to move the our user interface using the just quickly select a particular view that we want to see, and we also want to turn off our what we call our perspective. So what that does is everything is all lined up. So now if you take a look, you see that our current interpolation is what we call the linear. There's other two types of interpolation is we can do cubic, we can do blend, and as I change to each one of those, you notice that it will come in and then smooth out of that, where in the previous option was linear. Basically is take that cross section, no matter what that shape is, come up and stop and then mimic that cross section, and then from there go on to the next one. But in this case, we're to select a cubic. What it does is that takes us into a cubic method of interpolation, or we can use what we call the blend. So each one of those will create a different results of our swept command. So this is something that once again pay close attention to as you select using swept as your surface creation option. Okay, so that is now completed, and then we can turn on the other ones that created earlier. All right, once we have the two different swept surface that we have created, we notice that the first swept surface that we have created, then as it comes through, and then notice the second swept surface that we created are different sizes. So we have actually created some two intersection location through these datum planes that where we will transition from our first swept surface and into our second swept surface. In order to do that, we need to have some cross-section information. So let's go into our curve tab. In there, we have what we call intersection curve. So what that does is with our select intent to body faces, and then we select that is our body faces, and then we select what is our datum plane. This is our first datum plane, and it goes in there and create those three intersecting curves for us. We'll select apply. Likewise, grab onto our first swept surface and then grab onto the plane that intersects that. That'll give us the second set of intersecting curves. So now we have achieved that, and those curves is something that we will be using as we go in back to our using a through curves method surface to generate that. So now I have my sections that I created from those two datum planes from our swept surface, the first one, and the swept surface of the second one. We are ready to create a next set of surface that basically is a transitional surface. We want to go ahead and use what we call the through curves. So what through curves does that give us the option? In for curves, we grab onto that section, and then notice the flow direction is that particular direction, and then we select, we can say either add a new or select MB2. So what that does is give us the option to select the next set of our cross section, so which I will select this one down here. Now quickly, NX just give us a bridge basically from the size of a cross section, the first one, transition into our second one. So that is just quickly create one, but obviously we know that particular type of result will not be acceptable. There are other things that we can do. So in this case, that currently our current setting is at G0. So we can change that to a G1. So what that does is that now it requires us to get some input parameters from other surfaces. So now instead of single surface input, we want to go ahead and just select a body faces. So it's going to grab on to this set of body faces, our first one, and then grab on to the second body faces of the other one. So now you see that the transition is a little bit more different, a little more, has a little more activities going on, but now the flow direction is still not being very clear. So we want to go ahead and drop down. We have NX preview give us either not specified, or we can specify to isoparametric. So you notice that isoparametric, it's got that nice transition into that, or we can do select the perpendicular is the other options that we have. So let's go ahead and start with isoparametric. As we select the isoparametric, you see that the NX is putting that on, and then we still want to preserve shape. So what that does is that preserving the shape all the way through that transition from the first section into the other one. And then let's go ahead and change that to a perpendicular. The perpendicular in isoparametric is, see that, see there's a difference by just selecting either one of those. So you can decide which one. So the first one, the isoparametric, has a little more tangential as it coming through. It maintains that momentum coming in and then start coming through. Whereas the perpendicular has a little more right off the bat, it just start transition into the other side. So this is some of the things that the users can take a look, whether it be from viewing or from rendering. You can see that the results of each one, which one would be a preferred method of that. Okay, so by doing that now, so now we have a results of that. So we select OK, and now we see that we have a transition surface using through curves has given us that result. Now we have finished creating the through curve of a transition. We can kind of uncheck our previous sweat to see, once again, reviewing how that transition, if that's something that we will use and utilize in our next project. And since we believe that is sufficient, that we can use that, we'll go ahead and do that. And we can always go back and edit that type of settings and get what we want. All right, now what we want to do is we want to go ahead and do a trim command. So in this case, we have some excess surface. We want to go ahead and remove that. So in NX surface commands, we have this thing called trim sheets. So trim sheet basically is that now sheet body. I want to go ahead and select that one. And then what is my boundary? So this one, datum plane, did I use the same one? And then is what we want to remove. And then which part is this something, is this that we want to keep as a highlight, or this is what we want to discard? In this case, we do want to discard the front end of that because that's where our transition starts. Once that is done, NX will trim that back, and this once again is parametrically recorded. So if you don't like that, you can go ahead and select other type of surfaces or type of faces that you want to use for trimming instead of this particular datum plane. So now same thing, let's go ahead and select this one, and then what is my boundary? Once again, many things that we can use to select body faces, datum planes, and all that kind of stuff. So in this case, we have datum plane. And as we come into and decide which one we want to select, and we notice that we have created another one. So in this case, we want to trim off on both ends. So we'll come back and then grab onto that datum plane as well as we come in here, and then that tells us which one is going to be discarded, and we can say that we want to make sure we pick that. So let's go ahead and pick that one as well, and then once again, as we select which one we want to keep, we want to keep, and this is what we want to keep. And then we do a shift select. We don't want that. What we want is we want to keep the one in the middle. So once that is done, we select OK. So now we see that as we once again select and see that we will have a transition that is coming through from all these sections. Okay. All right, so now we're ready to come to the last part of our presentation. We see that our desk, our working environment is still kind of a clutter with all the datum planes and the cross sections and also our guide strings and stuff like that. So we can turn those off. We can either by knowing which one, just by selecting that, or we can do using a quick key, Control W. What that does is that's what we call the show and hide. Show and hide give us the ability to hide something that basically cleaned up our desk. So in this case, I don't need to see anything of datums such as coordinate systems, datum planes, or points. By selecting that, it hides all of them. Likewise, any curves, I can hide them. Any sketches, I can hide them. So this is a quick way for us to clean up our desktop, so make it a little easier to view what we want to do next. Similarly, on the top, I noticed that earlier I work on different projects require my some of my tabs. I have other aero design, animation designer, all that kind of stuff. Realistically, if I don't need them, I could actually turn them off. So that will make my desktop looks a little more cleaner. So this is just personal preference. If you can work through all the clutter, go ahead and do so. If not, then just go ahead and do what I've just done. So now let's go take a look at the surface. One of the things that we can do is what we call the sew command. The sew command is very much like solid bodies where we unite them together. In this case, we have a target sheet. It's kind of like a target body. So now what is our tool sheets? So here's the first one, here's the second one. So similar to solid geometries, we have a target body and then tool bodies, and we can unite them together. We're doing the same thing here as well. So now that is sewed together as a single sheet that for us to do our other actions. We can use the face blend or we can use the edge blend. In this case, let's go and select the edge blend, and then I just want to grab onto that. It goes in, and I can use the handle to get what I really wanted, but in this case I really just somewhere around 25 is what I'm interested in. I also want to select the back side of that, so that give us the kind of a nice transition on the outside, so there's no sharp edges whatsoever. Alright, so that is done. So now all we have is a sheet body of from our swept, from the two swept geometry, and then our transition. Now, how do we get that into our solid body? So the next command we will use is what we call thicken. What thicken does is that take a particular surface. Alright, so now what we want to do is body faces. We want to go ahead and select that. It creates that. So now the vector is pointing inward, so we're going to have a offset of a 2.5 millimeter is our results of that. So we can see, by doing so, we see that we have that is done, and then we can undo that. So if this is something that we want, we can change that to a 3 millimeter, and then now we are done with that. So once that we're done with it, we're okay. So now at the completion of that activity, we have created a offset of a solid geometry. We can see that as we zoom into that. We have a thickened body, and then we have the sheet body from there prior to that. So we can quickly see how the 3-point or the thicken of the 3, we can also change that to a 5, and notice that it's updated accordingly. So this is something that is how we can create a solid geometry from a surface. A lot of times that the users will also go in there and change the color of the, so we want to, let's just say if we want to go and change the color, we can also modify the color to a little bright blue color. So we see that kind of differentiate from the create a surface to a solid, and this is something that we can see, and then no different than before, and we can go back and then see that in our timestamp where we are, and then display the solid geometry, or in this case do a control key with W. We can go and hide our sheet body, and then all we see is our solid geometry that we created from derived from our surface geometry. So this concludes our demonstration today. Thank you.